MJ, there's always a ongoing debate these days about should a CMO report into CRO, and I think the de facto understanding is that, okay, well, the CRO would be kind of who would be the VP of sales. So coming from the marketing side, I expect you have some points of view on that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for me because I moved up the ranks in sales, but was very much traditionally a marketing person. And I always owned the marketing department first and then took on sales as a function of that. So for us, it was really useful because it allowed me to dovetail what marketing and sales were doing. And I think everybody knows when those two are working together, that's when kind of magic happens and it gets accelerated. So from my perspective, it was a huge benefit to have what I guess I could have been a CMO that turned to CRO, but where I really lacked and had to build the team to balance that was because I wasn't kind of a traditional and my background wasn't in sales. I did have to have really good, strong middle management and senior management that understood the kind of cogs and wheels that go into the metrics and all of the things that Larry was kind of alluding to at the beginning of this session. Because without that and without the data and understanding what to do with it, it affected all kinds of departments because marketing and success was under that umbrella too.
Totally. And for those that are watching along, I should have said before, so you can see us or hear us. We cannot see you, but through this great LinkedIn Live, you can post any questions or comments or anything that you want as well for MJ or Larry or me for that matter. So Larry, how do you think about the kind of from a specific title perspective these days, EVP, SVP, VP, XYZ, I don't know if it really matters as much anymore. Do you have any point of view?
I definitely do. It's interesting to watch. Titles almost seem to be negotiated as you come into the company. And somebody wants to make LinkedIn look a little better, so they negotiate an EVP title, and you can be called whatever you want, right? If you're looking for the next gig, they're going to figure out pretty quickly what your span of responsibility was and what was it really. So Randy being an SVP at HP and having 3,000 people working for him certainly different than somebody who has an EVP title and they've got 4 sales reps, right? Yeah. So I don't know how much it means anymore, but I think and it just keeps getting escalated. CRO now, if I want the next step, maybe I'm a president. To me, it all depends on span of control and responsibility and what you've actually done and that sort of thing. And the folks who really have the experience don't tend to care about the title as much.
No. MJ, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, other than just the self-realization of, and depending on the size of the company, there's a big difference between kind of a strategic leader and a tactical leader. So if you are going to be kind of the high level strategy person, then you do need other folks that can help execute on that strategy.
Yep, totally. And then MJ, what do you think about kind of the when different go-to-market pieces get added around the marketing, the customer success, the rev ops, partners, pre and post sales, technical, kind of all those different pieces. So what do you think about in terms of those different functions being added to the CRO function and when?
So it's like selfishly, I think it makes a lot of sense. It gives a lot of insight and control over kind of the full cycle of that sale and what the company kind of is producing. And to Larry's point, everybody is a salesperson at some level and kind of leading that charge by integrating them. I will say it's quite laborious. And so if you're going to, depending on how fast the company is scaling, adding in layers of management definitely help with that. And then offloading things that might be adjacent. So for instance, I had product underneath me for a good portion of my CGO part. I think that might have been, I could have relinquished that earlier. We had a really strong team on that side. And I think it can be a bit of a distraction from the other more generation kind of side of things for the sales and revenue. So I'd say just looking at how big those departments are and what the kind of interconnectivity or structure looks like, and then making sure that you tweak it as you scale makes the most sense.
Totally. Larry, anything to add?
I don't think so. I think MJ covered that pretty nicely.
It's the one area. I mean, they're all kind of, I'd say, traditional sales, marketing, pre-sales, post-sales, but this kind of whole customer success area is really something that's grown up Larry, how do you think of customer success these days?
Yeah, I mean, so as I was mentioning earlier, kind of in the world of SaaS, they're super important in terms of revenue retention, right? And the easiest people to sell to are the people that have already bought, right? And your ability to expand and all that sort of thing is super important. So, I love the function. I think it's an easier way than maybe traditionally we put this on sales. And, as a sales rep, if you closed a big deal and you know that probably you've locked yourself out of an account for a year or two revenue wise, you're not going to spend time there. You've got the next quarter to go to, and that's where they become, at risk. So I think the organization's super important. And then I think also just and sales reps don't like hearing this, but from a comp perspective, if you can have a lower cost, resource potentially gaining that expansion revenue, it's good for the company, right? It's good for profitability and those sorts of things. So, but that's where I think, and MJ and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. We sort of talked around the question of, all right, if you could, between marketing, sales, and customer success, if a CRO could only have two of those, which would you want to have? And I sort of fell on the sales and customer success side of it because it's all revenue, it's owning the customer and, that sort of thing. And maybe that's, for me, not having as much experience as she has certainly in the marketing space. But yeah, it's a super critical function, and net retention is a key measure in most companies these days.
Definitely. MJ?
Yeah, I totally agree. And like the customer success side is, I am in full alignment that is becoming the most important kind of function within sales organizations from the reasons that Larry said on like expansion. It's also where things get very messy. So if you have a rep that signs a deal and then trying to figure out what department is responsible for the relationship versus the actual revenue expansion, the renewal, you kind of have to have very good, solid guidelines and rules of engagement for that side. I would say on a different lens of looking at how that can increase revenue would be customer success really does develop those advocates within an organization. So I have seen a ton of peripheral success, not just by, a certain customer renewing or expanding their deal, but them going out and becoming very much like public advocates or referrals coming through those types of really solid accounts because you've invested in them and they have a relationship with the company. That's where we've seen a lot of kind of expansion success, but also just, extra.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a question from Benjamin. Thank you, Benjamin. Just joined. Who'd be the best person in a company to cold call with the intent of selling a service? I guess I would say maybe kind of circle back with the question, but obviously if it's a service for HR, you go to HR. If it's for marketing, you go to marketing. If you go to sales, go to sales. So I think it really depends upon who does the service help. Then depending how complicated it is, it's always good to touch base with somebody on the IT side. MJ or Larry, do you see anything different with that question?
No, I agree 100%. It depends on what your service does, who benefits from it, who would be the budget owner for acquiring something like that. Kind of the good old medic questions that you should always be thinking about.
Yeah, totally. So Benjamin, feel free to circle back. So from Peter Brennan, we have two questions. I go one at a time. Thanks, Peter. When hiring sales reps, how important is SaaS experience versus domain knowledge and or client relationships? Awesome question, and totally fine if you guys disagree. MJ?
Yeah. So actually with my most recent venture with LifeWrap, we didn't hire a ton of traditional sales reps at all, let alone SaaS experienced sales reps, because our approach to the market and what we were selling was just a little bit different. And we wanted to kind of roll it out in a very managed way. So I have found a lot of success in hiring people without traditional or SaaS experience for a sales rep role. I would say if they have something like logistics was an interesting one where we found a lot of really talented people because they were very good at project management, very good at communication. So I think finding maybe some personality traits that would support that if they don't have SaaS experience would be what I would say for the sales rep side.
Gotcha. Larry?
Yeah. So Peter, good to hear from you. Been a long time. I've kind of used a hiring model for most of my career that I learned early on, and there's kind of two areas for me that are non-negotiable, and one's motivation and what I would call even more specifically intrinsic ego drive. What drives you to succeed, and how do you do that and think about that every day? That to me is non-negotiable. And then what I've always called personal characteristics, and it's how do you do your business? What's sort of your business related ethical and moral compass that you drive? What's best for the customer? What's best for the company? Those sorts of things are non-negotiable. I've always sort of felt that if I found somebody that was off the charts in those two areas, I could teach them the selling skills and the domain knowledge that came along with it. Now, of course, if they were off the chart in those first two and came in having sold SaaS and in healthcare, if that's kind of what I'm doing, then that's a home run. But those two areas certainly speak to how fast you're going to get to productivity. If you've got somebody that don't have those, then it's going to be you've got to factor that into when they're going to be productive and creating revenue for your company. But that's kind of been my approach to it.
Yeah, and I guess I look at it on the client relationships. If it's a global account role where you're calling on Fortune 100, maybe Fortune 500, those client relationships are invaluable. So if you're selling to Citi, JP, B of A, and you're tied in, it's a technical solution, you're tied in with the CISO or CIO, to me that's invaluable. You can figure out the domain knowledge and you can figure out the SaaS experience. If it's more kind of commercial or SMB, obviously client relationships wouldn't matter as much unless it's on the partner side. And then another way to look at it, some CRO friends, just to think, Mark Parinello, Mark Thurman, Bill Hogan are SentinelOne, Tenable, Beyond Identity, which is in the security space, and I'd call them more maybe kind of legacy, very experienced enterprise sales leaders. But a lot of times these younger security companies will say you have to have SaaS, you have to have security. But I think they would argue, and I would argue, having somebody that's a great athlete in terms of knowing really how to sell, what to do it is far more important, and you can kind of pick up the domain knowledge and you can pick up the SaaS experience. So that would be my perspective. If you talk to somebody who's 30, 35-year-old CEO, one of these companies are going to say, you have to have SaaS, you have to have domain knowledge. So, and I deal with that too a lot of times in our recruiting business. We have a security company now who wants to focus, hey, you have to have healthcare. They really have to be from healthcare. I'm like, well, if you have, you may not be able to get the perfect profile that from healthcare that knows SaaS, but if they have healthcare relationships and they've proven track record, then somebody should look at. So, all right. So moving on to his second question: how critical is SaaS experience for roles outside of sales, ops, marketing, finance, et cetera? Great question, MJ.
Yeah. So for ops and marketing, I don't think that important. I'd say on the marketing side, somebody that has the innate ability to understand kind of the customer journey and how to explain what it is that you're doing is very important. Finance, I will say with SaaS, because there is a lot of nuances with how to report on some of those revenue numbers. There's a lot of different metrics that apply within SaaS. I would say on the finance side, having somebody that has experience in SaaS would be a huge kind of attribute.
Yeah, Larry?
I totally agree on the finance piece. I would differ slightly in ops, and it strictly depends on how involved ops is in deal structure. Because SaaS deal structure is very different than infrastructure or on-prem software. So, and if they're not, then I would agree with MJ. But if they're involved in deal structure, then it's important.
Yeah, that's fair.
Awesome. And Peter, just as a heads up, I meant to circle you. I'll do it on air here. So there's a Alexander Group exec event I'm going to. It's Dana Point, like the second or third week of November. So let's definitely make sure that we meet up. So anyway, so Benjamin, Peter, thank you. So any others listening along, feel free to chime in with any other comments or any other questions.